There are surprisingly quite a few people that are asking the question, is football an Olympic sport? The answer to this question may also be a surprise to you. The answer is not yet, but it soon could be. Football was played once before in both the 1904 and 1932 Olympic Games, but it was only officially played as a demonstration sport in the 1932 Games. The 1904 Olympics actually had college teams playing against each other as part of their regular football seasons. The 1904 Games had about 13 different American football games played. Football has not been played in the Olympics since then. There have been plenty of football players that have appeared in the Olympics competing in other sports. 1932 Summer Olympic Games features American football. When the 1932 Games appeared in Los Angeles, the big teams from the West Coast, which were Stanford, Cal, and USC, sent senior football players to play an all-star game against the best players from the big three schools from the East Coast, which at the time were Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. The game was a big success and was played in front of 60,000 fans in the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Some credit the success of this game as helping professional football to eventually get started, as fans were showing a willingness to see these games. Football an Olympic sport in the 2024 Games? There is a chance for football as an Olympic sport in the 2024 Olympic Games that will take place in the United States. The chances are still only slight that the game will be approved for the Olympics for those games. The biggest problem is, of course, that American football is not widely played across the world stage. The Olympics are, of course, games for the entire world. All countries come to participate and send the best athletes they have. The idea is that if football was made an Olympic sport, would there be any other countries that could have the slightest chance to give the United States a good game? It would hold very little interest or intrigue if the Americans were routing random little countries from Europe and places like that. Would these other countries be able to field competitive teams? This is what happened in both baseball and softball. The United States kept winning both easily, and both were dropped as Olympic sports after the 2008 Olympics. Let's call it gridiron instead. There are those that believe the sport being called American football by other countries is also an issue with the sport not being included yet as an Olympic sport. Some have suggested to call it a more generic name like gridiron. This is apparently what Great Britain and Australia are already calling the beloved American sport. For a sport to be named as American could indeed be a valid reason that it may not be accepted so easily by the International Olympic Committee. Maybe football is too violent. Some suggest that the American version of football is too violent and too dangerous, and this is the main reason that it is not yet included in the Olympic Games. Let's not forget, however, that both boxing and rugby are generally considered to be more dangerous than football, and they have both long been included as Olympic sports. This being the case, then the argument that American football is too dangerous to be included is not really true. International Federation of American Football lacks clear direction, IFAF. The IFAF is not nearly as well known, well organized, nor as powerful as the FIFA soccer organization. Most Americans have no idea about the IFAF and what it stands for, or who is even in charge of this organization. Without a clear mission for this organization, it makes it very challenging for American football to be considered to be included as an Olympic sport. The National Football League, NFL, has far more power and influence and has shown little support for the IFAF's World Tournament. There have been instances of questionable leadership by the IFAF and several other instances of mismanagement by it that have caused problems. With no clear plan and proper leadership for the group that is responsible for helping to expand the international popularity of American football, it is a definite problem. The NFL's Super Bowl is a huge event all across the world. Countries from all over the globe are quite interested in this mega football game each year. This shows that the game of football does indeed hold a wider appeal than some may realize. It was estimated that 120 million people across the globe watched the most recent Super Bowl. Clearly, there is international interest in the game of football. Whether or not the International Olympic Committee believes that remains to be seen. Which nations would field good teams with football, an Olympic sport? It would most definitely be interesting to see what the competition would look like if the game of football is approved for the games. Let's take a moment to think about what that might look like and who could field some competitive teams. Great Britain, the UK could probably field a decent American football team. The country is flush with good athletes and the game has been in the Europe area for some time. The World League of American Football brought attention to the game years ago. Let's not forget about the talented soccer and rugby players that come from there. Australia. This would be most interesting to see as Australia has a huge tradition of strong rugby players. There would seem no doubt that Australia would have some excellent kickers and especially punters. Let's not forget about the huge rise of star punters that have been making their appearances in quite a few major college football powers and even up to the NFL. This could really help an Australian football team in the Olympics. Germany. The Germans have a history of strong and skilled athletes from that country. It's unclear what current athletes that would be good contenders for a German football team in the Olympics, but Germany has a history of producing some world-famous athletes. It stands to reason that a strong and proud country such as Germany could field some capable and competitive teams in American football. Jamaica. This is an interesting thought on what a Jamaican football team might look like. Clearly, a Jamaican football team could be one of the fastest teams in the world. Their sprinters in track have been dominating on the world track and field stage for several years. No doubt a team from Jamaica could have the speed to compete with anyone else in the world. What are the chances we see American football an Olympic sport? Although it does seem like a long shot that American football ever becomes an official Olympic sport, there is still a realistic chance for it to happen. There is growing football interest finally in other countries, and the International Olympic Committee will have to make some decisions about this issue. If the game of American football does make it in, then it would be interesting to see how other countries would do against the United States in the sport that was invented here and that has been long played and watched by so many in our country. Let's hope we can all see one day American football as an Olympic sport that would be here to stay.